Thank you, Your Honor. May it please the court. Good morning. It's been a long trial, hasn't it? On June 7th, 2021, at the Moselle property in Colleton County, Maggie Murdoch and Paul Murdoch were brutally and maliciously murdered at the kennels by Alec Murdoch. Paul, as you know, suffered 2 shotgun blasts. Maggie suffered 5 blackout rifle wounds. And after an exhaustive investigation, there is only one person who had the motive, who had the means, who had the opportunity to commit these crimes, and also whose guilty conduct after these crimes betrays him. The defendant was the one person who was living a lie. The defendant is the person on which a storm was descending. And the defendant is a person where his own storm would actually mean consequences for Maggie and Paul, consequences for those who trusted him. And that person is the defendant, Richard Alexander Murdoch. I know this has been a long trial because it's a complicated case. And I'm not going to talk forever. I promise. But.
Well, Ben, did Mr. Waters live up to that promise?
He did not. That is a promise he did not keep. That was a long-winded closing argument. It was broken up by a lunch break and another break, and it went from 11:30 to just about 5 o'clock. And covered a lot of material is what I'll just have to say about it.
He definitely covered a lot of material. And I think when you just look at whether or not it was effective, I struggle to think that it changed anybody's minds, because he's basically saying everything that they've been saying for the past 4 weeks. He just reset it all. And I think it's important, if you're talking to a jury, to respect the jury and show them that you trust them to come to conclusions without you leading them down every single that you've been trying to make. And he wanted to kind of spoon feed every single thing. That shows a weakness in your case.
Yeah, I had the impression, this is something I talked about with a few people, that there was very little direct evidence in this case, almost none. It's all circumstantial evidence based on cell phone data and time signatures and location changes on phones and when cars started and stopped, and no eyewitness testimony. The few witnesses there are don't do things that are helpful for the state's theory of the case, right? So I think it's almost like they were trying to overcompensate for the lack of evidence pointing towards guilt in this case by going over every possible thing that they could have gone over in the case. And when you have the burden of proof and it's your job to convince the 12 people unanimously to find in your favor as the state, you don't want to be dragging things out and beating dead horses over and over. It's the same problem we've been talking about throughout the entire trial. The other thing I'll say is, don't ever do a closing argument with papers in your hand. He's not looking at the papers. He's just holding them there like Linus's blanket. It's very distracting, and you're taught not to do that. You're taught to have your hands free. You don't even want a pen in your hand, anything that can be distracting to the jury. That's my little nitpickiness.
One thing that really stood out to me was the style of the closing. These people have been sitting there for so long, and he put these PowerPoint presentations up that had no images. They didn't have large text. They had a lot of small text, and they had a lot of text. And he basically put the entire timeline down. And it's the thing that I've really struggled with the state's presentation the entire trial, and now it culminates in this closing argument, is that they have to have this story work the way they say it works, yet their own witnesses admit that they didn't investigate to find out about the tire tracks that we heard about at the beginning of the case, that the pathologist didn't do an x-ray of the brain to determine, to exclude the theory that the defense's pathologist was arguing for. There's a lot of things that they didn't do because they had one conclusion that they were working towards, and they let the evidence kind of lead them to that conclusion instead of doing a thorough investigation. It's like they have to have all of this information, and it has to work out exactly as they say. There has to be variables without your theory falling apart.
Yeah, this whole case is built around a timeline, basically. And the whole case is that the cell phone data shows a possible timeline in which Alex Murdaugh was at the kennels at 8:44 when there's a Snapchat video. The cell phone data, the cell phone usage for Paul and Maggie, the victims, ends around the same time, and within just a couple of minutes of Alex being seen at the kennels or being heard at the kennels at 8:44. He doesn't deny he was there now. That's the big problem in the case, right? But
that's a big problem.
And then there's time signatures around starting from 9:02 to 9:06. So there's like this timeline where everybody is speculating about what could be happening. The state has a theory that fits into that timeline, right? They include like 50 time signatures in there that aren't really relevant to the killings. It's been hard to track it, and these jurors have not been able to keep notes. So all of this is going to be very confusing to the jury. There's no doubt they proved that he definitely had the opportunity to do this, and they proved that he lied about where he was just prior to these murders happening, saying he never went to the kennels. It doesn't mean just because he lied about where he was immediately prior to this happening, they still haven't proven that he did it. The state's speculating, well, you can easily speculate that one or two or three other things could have happened at these times. And guess what? We're just assuming that they were killed around 8:49. What if just because the cell phone stopped recording anything from them at 8:49 doesn't mean they were killed at that time? That's an inference. It's speculative, but it's definitely not something that you can say beyond a reasonable doubt, right? And if the jury doesn't buy that they were killed around 8:49, and they've heard testimony from the coroner, it could have been anywhere from between 8 and 10 o'clock. There's no exact time of death here. We're convicting a man to life in prison based on an assumption that when the cell phone data stops, that's when the killings occurred. And I think that they're going to take big time tomorrow and say, and once you take that assumption out and you remove that, any number of things could have happened. The evidence after 4 weeks is pointing more towards the fact that he didn't do this. He may have been there. I don't even believe that, though, anymore, because the way he acted afterwards. So Shelley Smith's testimony for me kind of sealed the deal that I'm going to have to see some really good evidence that he committed these crimes based on her view of him 20 minutes after they would have occurred. And he didn't have a speck of blood. He didn't have any water, and he wasn't acting abnormal. And then we heard out of the testimony that just after that, he was talking to his law partners about cases that had known him for years. He didn't seem agitated or anything. He'd have to have some kind of superhuman psychopathy, which jurors may believe he does have that. He definitely was able to lie more so than anybody, and in some ways, he definitely can look somebody in the eye and lie. There's no doubt about that. They proved that over and over. But did he kill his own family? I just don't think they proved it.
I've got a part of the closing argument pulled up here where Mr. Waters is going through a timeline. And you put yourself in the seat of the juror after you've heard all of this testimony. And is it good trial strategy or is it potentially incredibly frustrating and distracting to the jurors for you to rehash every single piece of evidence? So let's take a look at what he does here.
All right, what else do we have? Because we talked about a lot of things about the finances, and I know that there's been a lot of that, but it's really the only way to understand all the things that were affecting this middle-aged, outwardly successful professional man who had all these pressures upon him, like no one had ever seen. Well, we've got the pills. He claims he's had a pill addiction for 20 years. What does he say about that? He says it makes him paranoid. He says it makes him agitated. He says opiates give him energy. Use your common sense about that. But he also says and he even said this in the telephone interview after the side of the road, that the withdrawals will make you do anything.
So this wasn't about the financial crimes, but I did find this a little bit frustrating, the way they used the financial crimes as the motive. And then if you look at the closing argument here, he spends a little bit of time right here talking about the addiction to opioids, you know, that he's taking all these pills. And I do agree that he testified that he was taking 1,000 milligrams a day sometimes, which is roughly, I think, 50 oxycodones, which is incredible. And whether you can survive that or not, I don't know. But they say that. And then if you listen to what he was just arguing, it's almost as if he is implying that he would do anything to get rid of the withdrawals, including murder his wife and son, which completely goes against the motive that they've been saying the whole time, because coming off withdrawals is a different motive than trying to distract from your financial problems.
Yeah, like there was just a ton of stuff in this closing because there was a ton of evidence put forward for weeks about all these financial crimes, his drug problems, all these other things. And again, those things don't do anything, despite what he says. They don't have a shred of evidence that he killed these people. That's the problem. The only thing that even changed in this case, that you could tell that they didn't really consider him the suspect the night of the killings. They were checking it out, but they didn't do much of an investigation. But they also didn't investigate anybody else. It was almost just like they inspected the area, nothing happened. They reopened the crime scene the next morning. He let him into the house, and they didn't really find anything at the kennels or in his home that pointed to him doing this. They never found blood in the drains or any of these things that would have had to be visible had he washed himself the way the state's now saying it happened, that he killed him. He hosed himself off outside the kennels, apparently, with that hose, and then rode back to the house, changed clothes, then rode to his mom's, all within 20 minutes. The amount of blood that would have been on this man, we've said this over and over, because both sides experts agree that the amount of blood and brain matter would have just been massive, right? It would have been impossible to just quickly rinse yourself of that. And there's no trace of it in his car. There's no trace of it on his clothes. There was some conflicting testimony whether there was blood smear or blood spatter on his clothes, but I think none of that came in because it was just inconclusive. That's from the state's witness, and they later lost it, so it couldn't be independently tested by the.
And then they destroyed the evidence, basically.
So there was just like no physical evidence here. And it became apparent more and more you're watching the evidence that there should have been physical evidence if he did it. All of those things would have been there, and they're not. And that's what the defense is going to just harp on tomorrow, is that all of these things that are missing.
And the other thing about it is that it's not just what's missing. It's also what's there and what's behind what they're saying. They're saying that they basically made the argument today that Alex Murdaugh is this mastermind liar, that he's been planning this for a long time. Making the argument that he's some kind of a mastermind, he's planning this murder for a long time, that he's angry and all of these different things. Yet he concocts this plan that my house of cards is about to collapse. So therefore me, the mastermind, Alex Murdaugh, I'm going to murder my wife and son in the most brutal fashion on my property with my guns. You leave the evidence there, right? All of the shell casings and everything, and leave everything there, and basically make it to where the only suspect is going to be myself. That makes no sense.
Yeah.
That you're going to do all of that on your property with your weapons, leave all the evidence, and you've been planning this for a long time. It's crazy.
It would have been very easy ways to make it look like someone else did it, right? I mean, the number of ways.
More than just having two guns.
Yeah.
I mean,
and some obvious tire tracks. There were tire tracks there, but they weren't really investigated. There was no murder weapon ever recovered. And they honestly never served search warrants on these properties for 3 months. And again, I mean, all this trial has shown is that for whatever reason, Alex Murdaugh lied about being at those kennels at around 8:44, so he was never there. The Snapchat showed he was, but that's not enough for a murder conviction. All that shows is that he's a liar. We know that. Boy, they proved he is a horrible, compulsive liar.
And he's going to jail for all of the things that he's done. I'm guaranteed that.
Separate cases and separate acts from whether he killed his wife and his son. And,
yes,
we're back where we were on opening statements. There wasn't anything really substantive in this trial that you didn't hear about in opening statements. The state's got to prove their case. They have the burden. And so they've got to get over that hump. And it has not just stayed 50-50, in my opinion. I'd say at this point it's 60-40 in favor of the defense, and they haven't even gone yet.
There's a subtle burden shifting going on. And when we talk about the burden of proof, we're talking about the state. There's a constitutional bias, if you will, for when you come in to look at whether or not the state has proven its case. You come in with a presumption that the defendant is innocent until the state proves guilty. And so you have a bias against the state. The state has consistently brought up the fact that Alex didn't make statements to show that he lied, right? They keep saying, when did Alex Murdaugh? Never brought that up until he was in front of you. Well, part of the reason he was in front of them was because the judge let in all of this character evidence, because that's what it was. I've never seen a trial with so much character assassination going on that was allegedly used as motive, but they've mainly used it as a way to show Alex Murdaugh lied. He lied to you. You can't believe anything he said. He murdered his wife and son. And that's not the way it's supposed to work.
And whatever he says about it doesn't really matter unless he admits it. By the way, I didn't hear a single reference. Maybe I missed it. Remember, there was a whole day worth of news, and there was all this emphasis in the trial, and they slowed down that video where the state was saying on the first time that he said, I did him so bad. And they slowed it.
The state never brought that up.
It never, that was the most ridiculous thing, and they lost so much credibility with me when their investigator was saying, I noted it at the time. You didn't write it down that he just admitted to killing him. That was one of the most ludicrous days, and to me, that's when it all started to fall apart for the state. And that was 3 weeks ago, it seems like. So we'll see what happens, but I think that definitely there's a lot of ammunition for this defense team to work on. They're very skilled lawyers with a lot of experience. They've done this a million times. And I think that we'll probably see a much more effective closing argument. I think that they're on the downhill slope now, and we'll see, nothing else bad can happen. Now they just basically get to look the jurors in the eye and give their theories of the case. I don't think there's going to be that much left. So let's see what happens. Be sure to subscribe. Be sure to like our videos so that you're notified as soon as these videos drop. And we'll be watching the closing arguments. We'll have more to say.